Good evening. Welcome. Won't you sit with me for a while? I'd like to talk to you tonight about two very different men writing two very different stories for two very different reasons. The first of these men is Sadegh Hedayat. Born in Iran in the early 20th century, he grew up in a family of privilege. He studied in India and France and was one of the first modern writers in the Iranian corpus. Then we'll talk a little bit about Shah Nasruddin Qajar. One of the last Shahs of the Qajar line, he ruled Iran at a time of its greatest territorial extent and was a man of art as well as a man of very ambitious plans to modernize and bring his country into the 20th century. So won't you join me today as we look at these men and their writings and try to see what we can learn from them. Sadegh Hedayat wrote the book 3 Drops of Blood. It was a collection of short stories that all centered around a main theme involving blood, because that's who he is as a person. If we look at the story specifically of Dashakal, which I have chosen to translate for you, we see a man who is constantly drunk, known very well around the town for fighting, as well as helping others. Dashakal spends 7 years of his life waiting on the family of Haji Samad. He struggles with his feelings for Marjan, his feelings of duty, his freedom, and how he can make all of those work together. It's a sad story, one very typical of Hedayat's work. In fact, it's very much in the vein of his other work, The Blind Owl, which sees a sad, drug-addicted man dealing with the problems of modern life in Iran at the time it was written. It seems that these themes of substance abuse, self-loathing, and at times the joys of life, if they can be found, are central to Hedayat's work. He was a sad man in general and did die by his own hand, in fact. That wasn't his first attempt either, although his most successful, I would say. Stop there. Shah Nasruddin, on the other hand, was a different character. Very well educated. He was also of a Turkic family. This is an interesting element to his character, because while it doesn't necessarily influence his speech so much, there are things that come up, such as different types of garments that he talks about himself wearing or others wearing, which I hadn't had any experience with until this point. That may be due to the antiquity of the piece. It was written in the late 1800s, but it also has to do with the fact that some of these just may not be words anymore, as Western clothes have replaced many of the common traditional clothing items in Iran. Moreover, through the Shah's experience, we get to learn the roles and titles of various different members of his court. It's an interesting note, and it gives a kind of upstairs-downstairs feeling. This is in fact the scopos of the two works. The first, Hedayat's Dashakal, was meant to be read by people. It was meant to be published, read, and enjoyed by as many people as could get their hands on it. As such, its value is entertainment, and in feeling feelings that hopefully none of you will ever have to. It gives you a moment in the life of a common person in Shiraz. It's a sad moment. It's not a particularly pretty moment, but it is a moment, and it encapsulates that well. However, Nasruddin Shah, I don't think ever intended for his memories to get published so that common folk could see them. And if he had, I doubt he would talk about things like calling one of his ministers a, ugly pock-faced thing, or talking about bleeding from his anus. I'm just saying, when I write my book, that's not going to be in there. Now, more than just the scopos, the format is different. Hedayat has a way of drawing you into the life of an average Shirazi. He shows you the dusty, grimy side of Shiraz, from Ishaq the Jew's distillery / house to the tea house where he confronts his greatest rival, the opium-smoking Kaka Rostam. Whereas Nasruddin Shah lived in a world that no one ever saw, really. A world of palaces, of beauty, of art. And in this way, I feel we get to step into that a little bit. To see in this gilded cage, as it were, that there can be sadness, there can be dreariness, even for one of the most powerful men. And I think that is one of the most dramatic things about both of these, is they show two men of different situations in the same state. On one hand, we have Dasha Kal, who, gripped by his love for Marjan, spends his nights fighting himself, fighting the urge to be free, and fighting the feeling that by marrying Marjan, he could somehow be doing the wrong thing, for whatever reason. Nasruddin Shah, on the other hand, well, he's sad because he's sick. But I also think that there's a certain amount of human weakness that we get to see through this, that we don't often get to see in royalty. That's very important. The Shah talks about his headaches, his chronic depression, his unwillingness to do anything. And if that doesn't describe life in 2020, well, I just don't know what does.